The modern world has inherited a rich legacy from those who came before us. Laughter. Ancient places speak of great civilizations that once flourished have been passed into memory, though we have learned to decipher artifacts and ruins. Like this, mystery often dwells here. Why, with razor-sharp precision, do so many monuments of antiquity seem to point towards certain stars in the sky? Why do so many ancient texts contain references to strange flying objects centuries before the invention of the airplane? In all of the classical ancient cultures that we know of, there have been descriptions of unusual aerial phenomena, and in many cases these can be interpreted as some kind of craft piloted by intelligent beings. Despite increasing public support for the notion that UFOs may have been visiting the Earth since the dawn of history, the scientific community is overwhelmingly skeptical about the subject. Ancient people saw weird things in the sky, and they were convinced that these were symbols of the gods' intentions. Their lives were controlled by the gods, and in every case that I am aware of, there is an alternate explanation. It could have been a meteor which they didn't understand. It could have been some ball lightning. It could have been any kind of thing that was just totally unknown to primitive men. One of the earliest written records of an encounter with a UFO comes from Egypt more than 3,500 years ago. There's a story about Thutmose III, an Egyptian pharaoh who saw circles of fire in the sky. It started off with one, and then the report says that a few days later there were many of them in the sky. He was so impressed that this was recorded on a papyrus and considered very momentous. In the year 22 of the third month of the winter, a circle of fire appeared in the sky. After some days it became more numerous and shone with the brightness of the sun, extending to the very limits of the heavens. The records of Pharaoh Thutmose, 1480 BCE. Thutmose was not alone. 11 centuries later, during his invasion of Asia, the mighty Greek leader Alexander the Great is chronicled as having witnessed UFOs while crossing a river in 329 before the Common Era. Alexander and his men observed what are described as gleaming silver shields in the sky. The objects repeatedly swooped down on the column of soldiers, scattering men and horses in panic. 7 years later, while attacking the Phoenician city of Tyre in the eastern Mediterranean, Alexander again encounters UFOs recorded by observers on both sides of the conflict. One of the objects suddenly shoots a beam of light at a city wall, which crumbles into dust, allowing Alexander and his troops to easily breach the defenses and take the city. The passage of centuries leaves us with little proof of whether the events really took place or were merely the products of fertile and imaginative minds. But remember, the working hypothesis for historians for hundreds of years has The saga of events that once played out against the landscape of the Middle East is enshrined in the Western world's most revered book, the Holy Bible. In recent years, the Bible has been increasingly touted by some scholars as a collection of stories describing encounters with aliens and UFOs. But the topic is controversial. Can the sacred nature of the biblical text be challenged? With a decline of religion that has been experienced by a great many people, I think people are looking for an alternative that is more scientific. And so the possibility of life is one that has been suggested by scientists. So the next best thing to having a supernatural intervention in our world is to have UFOs visiting us from another civilization. So I think there's a certain would-be religious urge that has moved in the direction of supporting Artifacts discovered throughout the Near East speak of a time when humanity's ancestors came to Earth from the heavens. Hundreds of clay tablets and cylinder seals depict human-like beings with wings, linking them with the sky and always conspicuous, the stars. If you look at the ancient history of the Near East and consider the Sumerians and Babylonians, you'll find that these peoples believed that their civilization was given to them by beings who came down from the heavens. There's nothing in the historical record that is really conclusive. There are some intriguing stories in the records of Babylon, for example, but the human mind is so easily able to invent myths and fantasies that we have to take these ancient stories with a grain of salt. Yet archaeologists have often pondered on the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid at Giza are two of the greatest enigmas of all time. The exact dates of their construction are still cause for debate. How did ancient people develop the technology to build the Great Pyramid with a discipline and precision still unmatched today? The Great Pyramid of Egypt stands more than 450 feet tall. It weighs more than 6 million tons, and it has a footprint in excess of 13 acres. It's perfectly aligned to true north, south, east, and west. To achieve that precision of alignment with a monument on this scale is an extraordinary technological feat, and one that is continuously overlooked by our scholars today. Suddenly, out of nowhere, this extraordinary monument, a high-tech achievement by any standards, just appears on the desert. This is a great mystery, totally unexplained by conventional history, and one that requires us to use our minds, our imagination, and our intelligence to try to work out what on earth is going on here. Perhaps the most perplexing sight of all in South America is the Nazca lines in Peru, covering more than 200 square miles. A bewildering pattern of gigantic artwork litters the Nazca Plateau. In addition to figures of birds, spiders, and animals, arrow straight lines stretch out to every point of the compass. Believed to have been laid down here more than 2,000 years ago, what was their purpose? Observable only from a great height, is this attempt signs and symbols etched in the sand to honor pagan gods? Or, as some people believe, do they contain hidden messages aimed at ancient travelers from the stars? These are very remarkable sculptures made by essentially moving pebbles so as to change the color tone of the desert surface. It appears that many of these patterns of lines seem as though they're oriented towards the heavens in some way. We really don't know what they were for or how they were interpreted by the people who made them. I think that this may be one explanation, that the Nazcans were projecting these into the sky and using them for religious and ceremonial purposes. But the Nazca lines really do constitute a mystery. No one really knows what they were for. Asia, ageless land of 1,000 legends. It's also a continent of intriguing mysteries. During the 1920s, while exploring northern China, famous Russian artist Nicholas Roerich wrote of a remarkable incident in the Himalayas. On August 5th, in our camp at about 9:30, some of our caravanners noticed a huge, shining oval shape flying high overhead. It came from the north at great speed, crossing our camp before disappearing into the clear blue sky. It had a bright, luminous surface, brilliantly reflecting the sun. Nicholas Roerich, Travel Diary, 1936. In the long history of this vast and beautiful continent has the UFO phenomenon shaped myths and stories handed down from generation to generation. A brief glance at the texts of ancient India is revealing, for here too we find the haunting presence of strange phenomena observed in the sky. Gurkha, flying a swift and powerful Vimana, hurled a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns rose with all its splendor. The Mahabharata, compiled some 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. The Mahabharata is a Hindu poem written in Sanskrit 10 times longer than Homer's Iliad and Odyssey combined. It is a saga of conflict on a cosmic scale. The plot of the Mahabharata, which is the great epic of ancient India, has to do with an invasion of the Earth by negative extraterrestrial forces. Basically, the idea was that governments of the Earth were taken over by beings coming from other planets who had the desire to control and exploit the situation for their own personal benefit. The story goes on to describe how godly forces intervened. And finally, there was a great battle here on the Earth in which the issue was resolved and the negative forces were repelled. Another epic poem, the Ramayana, was written more than 2,000 years ago. It too tells of conflict and conflagration in India's distant past. The Vimana was a weapon so powerful that it could destroy the earth in an instant. It made a great soaring sound in smoke and flames, and on it sits death, the Ramayana. Prominently featured in all these stories are strange flying devices referred to as vimanas. What were they? Could they have been UFOs? The vimana is described in some detail and its flight pattern is also described. It's quite interesting because it's very similar to the pattern of flight which is described in the context of modern UFO sightings. For example, the vimana would move in a very abrupt zigzag,